Whether it's a hot time in Florida or a rainy night in Georgia,
looking for trouble?
It's the perfect time for the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast.
Oh, yes, sir. Good to see you go from. Just glad to bring you the hottest thing in the country, real hot and blue, coming to WHB in Memphis, Tennessee.
With your hosts, Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar. The TCBcast is on the air.
Welcome to TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis Presley fan podcast. I'm Justin Gosman.
And I'm Gurdip Ladar.
Gurdip, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Kind of busy at work, but, you know, it's typical. Just looking forward to next month, my birthday. Woo, I'm older.
Yay.
I get older. That's my gift. The gift of age.
Yeah.
How about you? What's going on with you?
Yeah, things have been good. I've been working on very steadily the Blue Suede review for Wild in the Country.
Right.
That's coming up on our Patreon at patreon.com/TCBcast. Going to be exclusive for patrons, but I'm really excited. I was just telling you, it's a big one.
When's the
As
last
of right
time
now,
you did one of these?
2016.
Wow. Okay. So as of right now, what?
That would be what?
No. You were saying as of right now, it's very long.
As of right now, it's hovering just under 5,000 words.
Wow. And that's the longest ever?
It is the longest that I've done so far. But to be fair, Wild in the Country is a very long movie. It is Elvis's second longest movie behind King Creole, and it has way fewer songs. So, yeah.
Interesting.
There's a lot to get through.
Look forward to that for sure.
Totally. Speaking of our Patreon, just want to real quick before we dive into the news, give a shout out to our new patron, Mark Spink,
awesome.
who joined over at patreon.com/TCBcast. So, Mark, hopefully you're enjoying all the extra content and early access to episodes that we've got over there.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you.
What do we got Elvis news-wise this week?
The only thing I saw was, and you saw it as well, is that, was it drone or some kind of footage? Baz Luhrmann's 50 set, which it shows like a few blocks of Memphis, a facade basically of 50s era Memphis with period cards, the whole 9 yards. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it looks interesting. I did notice that it was legible to read on one of the buildings, the Lansky Brothers. So, at the very least, and it looked like it was one of the more substantial buildings. It's possible they may have actually just built a set there, like Elvis going into the Lansky Brothers and then walking out onto the street or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that that gives us one hint at maybe one setting for one scene.
There you go. And they'll probably tweak it with CGI in the final product. So it'll
they'll have extensions and stuff.
Yeah, it'll look like 50s era Memphis. I'm sure Beale Street will be there somewhere.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's just out on some different Elvis Facebook groups out there.
Yeah.
Not too hard to find. So, other than that, not a whole heck of a lot coming up at the moment, Elvis news wise. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, should we continue on with Elvis What Happened, Chapter 12?
Absolutely.
Hold it, fella. That don't move me. Let's get real gone for a change.
If your child is a daddy, good God, you know I can help.
So this one pretty much leaves, or where the last one left off, or continues where the last one left off with Elvis's continual rise in popularity. They talk about how Ed Sullivan kind of took his cue from New York newspapers in criticizing Elvis. He was nothing but a fad, a flash in the pan. He'd rather play 60 minutes of test pattern rather than put Elvis on, which is crazy. Like, Sure you would, Mr. Sullivan. Sure you would. They talk about the Dorsey Brothers stage show, how it was, struggling to gain viewers. The Perry Como show was pretty much destroying it in ratings, and even though it was like a lead into the popular Honeymooner show, which was, both were produced by Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
And then I guess the Colonel was kept on pestering Gleason to put Elvis on the Dorsey Brothers stage show. And he finally acquiesced, and he made his debut in January. Why do you think the Colonel picked the Dorsey Brothers for the first appearance of Elvis? Did he think that he wouldn't be able to get anywhere else?
Yeah, I think that they were the ones that were most likely to say yes.
Okay, just because they were struggling rating-wise also?
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't start with Ed Sullivan.
Yeah, that's true. And then, so he made his debut there, although they incorrectly say that he sang Heartbreak Hotel on his first appearance rather than Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Mm-hmm. Would they have that kind of information in the 70s of what he sang?
That was one thing I actually wanted to talk about, is that this description is kind of notable because most people wouldn't have seen those from its original airing in the 50s, because copies were much harder to come by. Like, you had to have had like a film camera, like, at your house. You had to be rich to do your own sort of home, kinescope of, it wasn't like you could just, record off, with VHS or a DVR or something like that. Yeah. Like, if you didn't have a copy of this and weren't rich enough to make one yourself, you weren't watching this footage in the 70s. So it's interesting that this description is noted here.
Yeah. I mean, there were a few documentaries. We talked about that. I can't even remember what it was. Something about rock and roll, the people that made This Is Elvis. But I wasn't sure if that came out before or after this. I think probably after this book. So, that's true. So I guess that information was as readily available unless you were actually there and lived it, which Red was. So I guess he probably just forgot what he's saying.
Yeah. I mean, Elvis was on so many TV appearances. I'm sure that, in most people's head, they conflate, what was on what.
Yeah, that's true.
So they do dive in a little bit onto the controversy following Elvis's appearance, and obviously him being dubbed Elvis the Pelvis and some of the backlash. And, Red sort of notes that there wasn't a lot of time to let it sink in, and that life sort of quickly became about money and women and fancy gifts.
Yeah. We should also mention that Dorsey's show destroyed Perry Como's ratings that night. So, and then they get into the whole thing of how parents and critics hated Elvis and were against everything he stood for, and this only made him more appealing to teens and I guess kids. And then Red continues to talk about how he made nothing during those days, even though there was big deals going on, like you said, with the Colonel, and Elvis's bank account was now like bustling and busting. Elvis would work like a dog, driving everywhere and doing odd jobs no one else wanted to do. He also mentions that how Scotty, Bill, and DJ also weren't happy about their money situation. And I mean, he goes into the Elvis's psyche here about how he loves giving gifts but not money to people. He thinks that Elvis believes giving money to people gives them independence, and hence they wouldn't need him anymore. And he's willing to clothe you, feed you, and give you a good time, but he wants to be in charge of what he gave you, and he gives them enough to stay around, but not enough to be independent. Which he says it's almost a prerequisite to be broke to be around Elvis. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, I think that generally rings pretty true. And it's interesting that they pointed out that Jerry Schilling was one of the handful of guys that was fairly independent, and that caused some friction both within the Memphis Mafia and between Jerry and Elvis at times.
Yes.
Because Jerry was happy to go off and have a career in Hollywood and have his own relationships and be his own individual. And I think Jerry was better for that. By everything that we've seen.
This rings true with his friends, but I still can't get over the whole way that Scotty, Bill, and DJ were treated. because that wouldn't really ring true to them, though, right? Because obviously they're acquaintances and friends, but they're not like friends where they hang out all the time. They work together.
They're coworkers, yeah.
Coworkers, yeah. So I don't know. That's the one part of Elvis I really can't get my head around. I've mentioned that many times in the past, but we're never going to solve that because all the people are pretty much dead.
Yeah.
And then Red remembers an embarrassing story when him and Elvis went to some fancy restaurant in New York with the Aberbox, and Red goes to the bathroom and they have one of those attendants there that pass you a towel or whatever, and Red's about to leave, and when the dude asks for a tip, Heath's dead broke, he has nothing, and he says he kind of just embarrassingly says he left his wallet on the table, and then he's totally scared that the dude would come over and ask for a tip.
Right.
So another thing we get into is we talk about Elvis buying his first home on Audubon and how they put in a pool in there, even though Elvis hates to swim. I remember that documentary, that Elvis 56, where they have pictures of Elvis swimming. And he seems to be having a good time. So I don't know what this was about. Did you read that?
Yeah.
Plus,
we
footage.
have video of Elvis swimming at home
in Graceland, right?
Yeah.
So okay, I was like, I don't understand that, but whatever. They talk about the Steve Allen appearance, and I don't think they mentioned Milton Berle at all, which they might have forgotten.
Not really, no.
And because how successful Steve Allen was himself, and now wanted Elvis on the show, and much to the glee of the Colonel, who loved that Sullivan was now coming to them, he made him pay $15,000 for that privilege. And they talk about how Elvis was, again, the popular thing about Elvis was filmed from the waist up, but they didn't mention that it only happened on the last appearance, not the first two. So I guess this goes with the whole thing of, that people just forgot. They just thought he was always filmed from the waist up.
Right.
Because they didn't have that footage,
to just refer to at any given moment. They couldn't just cue it up.
No, not like us punk kids now. Red talks about how he was frustrated about not being appreciated, and the last straw was when he was carting around a little trailer that Vernon had set up, the hook behind the road car. It got a flat, and Red just kind of left it there on the side of the road and loaded up the car with whatever was in there. And when he got to the venue, he thought, everybody would be happy that he actually made it from those long distance, because at the time, Red was also tired. All Vernon could do was yell and complain about what Red had done, and Elvis just laughed, and Red had enough, and he enlisted in the Marines. That totally sounds like something Vernon would do, no?
Yeah.
And then they talk about, how the Colonel was in his element, marketing Elvis and everything he could. It was like merchandise galore. And Gladys was also happy with Elvis's success, but she looked sicker day to day. And, we get into the whole thing about buying Graceland because the Audubon house was getting too small with all the friends and family, and he buys Graceland. And then we just talk a little bit about Elvis starting his film career with Love Me Tender, and they wrongly state that they started filming in 57, and I was like, another mistake.
Yeah. And also what I thought was interesting was that Steve Dunleavy starts describing Love Me Tender as having started the package trend of having the low quality movies accompanied by the soundtrack albums.
Yes.
And it's like, not really, because Elvis wasn't even in the starring role, and it only had 4 songs.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's true. I think it was Red who talks about Deborah Paget, how Elvis was taken by her.
Yeah, he had a crush on her.
But she never really reciprocated that affection. And then Sonny and Red both talk about how Priscilla resembled Deborah Paget, especially when Elvis had her hair dyed black. I think I heard that somewhere else, too, how Priscilla was...
It's been mentioned.
Yeah. Like if he couldn't get Deborah Paget, he got someone who looks like her. Which might be the case. Might be why he became so infatuated with her in Germany. He's like, holy crap, it's a dead ringer. They talk about how during the filming of Jailhouse Rock, Elvis seemed to be slowly becoming Vince Everett in real life.
Yeah.
Like when he pulled out the cigar, he demanded someone light it and freaked out when no one did. That scene was in that Kurt Russell film. Remember that? where he pulls out a cigar and everyone goes to light it for him.
Yeah, yeah. Although it was depicted more as just sort of a ridiculous, like them doing it with him, rather than him, demanding it.
Yeah, and then same thing with like an empty glass of water in front of him, and they talk about how him getting angry at the drop of a hat was getting commonplace, and it only got worse with the pills. And that's pretty much it. They leave the chapter with how Elvis was about to lose someone he loved the most, and that's it. What did you think?
Yeah, this was an okay chapter. It talks a little bit like we said, about Elvis's sort of up and coming film and TV appearances, on his way up, and how his personality sort of shifted ever so slightly. But I me with the whole Jailhouse Rock thing and conflating Elvis with Vince Everett, and that just pisses me off.
They kind of do that here, though. They say he was becoming Vince Everett.
I know. And they say that because that was because I saw that like Dunleavy was going down that route, because he's like, Jailhouse Rock marked the first of the gradual changes in his personality. Mm-hmm. They were changes that would bring him endless hours of suffering. And I immediately knew that they were going to draw this line where they sort of conflate. Like I don't doubt that Elvis certainly had an ego at times, and that he did have a lot of hangers on that were wanting to jump in and be the the person who helped Elvis with this or that.
Yeah.
But that's not really reflective of Vince Everett, because even in the film, like, Vince had lackeys and stuff like that, but it was not to that extent. The character.
Yeah.
Just frustrating.
Yeah. But otherwise, it's fine.
Yeah.
So far, so good. Not too bad. We'll continue on next week. All right. So what's our main topic this week?
So our main topic this week, we'll be discussing essentially Elvis and the black community. This week, we're being joined by Giacomo, or Jay Viviano, who, along with many other Elvis fans of a variety of cultural backgrounds, has been researching and compiling information on Elvis's interactions with the black community for quite some time.
For sure. All right. Well, let's cut to that right now.
Still try with this last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star.
So, Gurdip, Jay, Gurdip.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you both. I've been listening to, I've caught some of the podcasts, and I've listened to the Roy Hamilton one. Really sticks out in my mind often. You can't go wrong with anything Roy Hamilton related. It was great listening. And then also another one recently I listened to. I don't think it was long ago. It was your with the Beatles. I might get the guy's name wrong. I don't want to try to pronounce it. But
Anthony.
The guest you had on. Yep, that was really interesting, and I thought about that because I had just off topic of Elvis, but actually, it's not really. Is John Lennon? I've always read a lot of his interviews, and whenever especially the ones in the '70s and in the year right before he passed away, and not long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, his last interview on the day he passed away, which I didn't realize up until about a year ago, he actually gave one on the day he was killed. And I don't know if either of you had a chance to, if you got a transcript of that, or if you've ever had a chance to read it or listen to it.
I don't think I have.
But he mentioned, it's a long one. But it's great, and it's sort of bittersweet because you're listening to this and the man ends up his fate for the end of the day. It's sort of hard to listen to, but it's a really revealing interview, and he mentions Elvis's name quite a few times. And so I got a transcript of it, and I was reading it because some of it I missed the first time listening to it. And it dawned on me, he brought up Elvis's name maybe 4, possibly even 5 times. And I sat back after that, and I thought about that, and I said, wow, Elvis was really on John's mind the day he passed away.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 4 or 5 times in one interview. And it's true, you know, a lot of people that knew John said it was no joke. He had a very emotional, personal, you know, he thought a lot about Elvis, probably more than maybe some people realized. But,
yeah, he was definitely a big fan.
It goes to show you, no matter how big you
right,
become, the influences that you had when you were growing up, those stick with you, because you can
they stay with you, right.
You can see that with Elvis too. I mean, he got big, but he was still listening to the influences that, you know, were there when he was growing up. So, like Roy Hamilton and what.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, not only that, but also you know, Laverne Baker and Clyde McPhatter and Johnny Bragg and Bill Kenny and. Well, this is actually a great. I think we can probably just slide right into our discussion here because we're kind of just rolling, and I don't want to stop us while we're going. So, welcome to the show, Jay.
Sure.
It's great to have you on.
Hey, man, and thank you guys. I mean, really, I don't want to. You know, it doesn't hardly sound enough to say, hey, thanks for having me on, but it's something that I think is really such an important topic, to say the least. And I really appreciate that you guys have an interest in wanting to, to dive into this and talk about it. So really, thank you.
Why don't you let the listeners know, Justin, how you got introduced to Jay and what Jay has started on Facebook?
Yeah, well, just briefly, Jay, I met via a Facebook group that you and several others have sort of formed a little private community on there, focusing around the history of Elvis in the black community, so that your interest in that was brought to my attention through that Facebook group. And so we thought that, having seen all the research that you've done, it would be great to have you on for this conversation, in particular for sort of our last show for Black History Month this year.
Sure, absolutely. If I have quite a few admins, thankfully to them. It's not something I could do myself. I've got quite a few. And I think I won't say I don't know if he wants me to say his full name on here, but I'll say his first name, Chris. I think Chris, a mutual friend of ours, he told me he was going to reach out to you or mention me to you. I don't know. But Chris, a great guy to himself. We basically, I have some mutual Elvis-related friends that are also researchers, historians, and fans, and they're outside of that, they're like me in that we're also big fans of pop culture in general and researched in other areas outside of beyond Elvis. And they tend to be my go-to people when I'm kind of have questions about music or that era, and back and forth with us over the years. So I brought a couple other people into the fold since we started the group. So we've got a few different people that are, we all kind of just, we're very, we kind of, as you said, Black history, with Elvis Presley, it's a topic that you can't really separate. Most historians, most pop culture historians, most writers, they know that you cannot discuss Elvis and his career without, he arrived on the scene in 1956, right at the beginning of the Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, the bus boycott started and the civil rights movement took off, and you had segregation going on, the Brown versus board. You had a lot of things happen in the country that led right into the 1960s and so on, and Elvis is a huge part of that, what many people call cultural and musical revelation. So there's no way to, and much of my research is sort of kind of seems to keep it. It seems to magnify that. It seems to kind of parallel a lot of my research. Is beyond just Elvis. It's other. As I said, I've researched in the Jim Crow era, the Civil Rights era, and other artists and rhythm and blues artists, and much of my research, it tends to overlap. I just think there's a bigger story there than maybe's been told. I found a lot of things, as I told you, Justin. I found a lot of things that I haven't really, and my other research friends, they haven't seen in other much other Elvis writings or by other biographers, and through old newspaper reports and magazines, and that's sort of what we focus on. Is whenever we find something, we bring it to each other's attention and we discuss it, and we can dive in wherever you'd like to for your show, whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's take one step back, because I thought it was interesting that you talk about how, and this is partly another reason why I wanted to have you on, is that sort of we talk a lot on TCBcast about the fact that Elvis's life has sort of become a mythology unto itself, and that there are aspects of the story that just sort of become gospel, and maybe at first glance you might hear, that Elvis spent time as a teenager on Beale Street, or you might hear that Elvis was taking influence from someone like Big Mama Thornton or Arthur Crudup. But those who go a little bit deeper know that there's so much more to the story than just that even for a lot of Elvis fans, that's maybe as deep as they go on it, let alone people who are non-Elvis fans who oftentimes will even go as far as to say the famous criticism of that he stole black music or things like that, but to know that to put it in the maybe most blunt terms, which goes along with the name of the group that you have on Facebook, is that Black Lives Mattered to Elvis, and take that not necessarily specific to the Black Lives Matter movement, because obviously it wasn't around, but on its face, the actual words that people of color mattered to Elvis. And that, to me,
on its most basic principle.
Yes,
right.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And that's one thing that we've kind of skirted around the edge of here on TCBcast, but I think it's cool to see all the research that you've done. And so, let's go ahead and dive in to a little bit of Elvis and the black community. I would say, starting early on, as early as his youth, he had friends. Some of his childhood friends were people of color. And even there was a recently,
absolutely.
As Baz Luhrmann was doing research for his movie that's coming up, he was down in Tupelo meeting with one of Elvis's friends. I believe I actually even saw that originally in your group, that you had shared that in there.
You probably did, because we had that video came up missing, unfortunately.
Yeah,
that Baz had done. It's the mythology is, we've all heard it a million times. Non-Elvis people and many Elvis people, is Elvis got it from sneaking around clubs and looking in the windows in churches and clubs on Beale Street. Mm-hmm. That is false history. It didn't happen. It's not. It sounds good, but it's the easy go-to, and it might make sense on the surface. But the reality is, Elvis, unlike maybe some other white artists of that era, didn't come to rock and roll or rhythm and blues through just listening to the radio. He came through it through physical relation with the black community. He had friends. He went to black churches. And it started, as you said, Justin, in Tupelo. Not just Memphis. The history, the mythology has taken over the facts, and a lot of people don't know. But long before Memphis was Tupelo. It was his friends in Tupelo. It was going to tent revivals. You were talking about
Sam
his childhood
Bell,
friend,
yeah.
Sam Bell. Sam Bell. He verified it. Elvis went with him, and he said his homeboys. Elvis was one of them. One of our homeboys.
Is EP part of the gang?
Yeah.
I mean, segregation. For me, it's hard to understand segregation.
He was just one of the boys. Once he came in the neighborhood, he was one of the boys, in the neighborhood.
This thing is amazing to me. You mean EP? Some of the guys in the gang were lighter skinned than EP. No. There wasn't a whole lot of well, you're a white kid.
No, it wasn't that in the neighborhood. No, only time you get there is different when school time.
Yeah.
When he had to go to one school, we had to go to another. As soon as school's out,
nothing.
Right there together.
Would he stay at your place at any time, or?
Yeah, if he wanted to.
Stay over?
Yeah, my grandparents, they just loved him.
Yeah.
He had better. He could go through the house better than we could. He'd go in there and get what he wanted, open the refrigerator and get what he wanted.
So your grandma really liked him?
Yeah, she really loved him. Mm-hmm.
Well, what did she like? Why was he like him?
Because he was so mannerable. You know, we was little mannish little guys, you know, but he was mannish too. But
what do you mean by that?
Yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And see, during that time, if a black person didn't expect a white person to say yes, ma'am,
to be polite, to be
yes,
decent.
ma'am, thank you, yes, sir.
Yeah.
But he always did that, and she just loved it. And my papa did too. He just couldn't believe it. You know, he don't have to, but we would say yes, sir, too. But we had to because we lived there.
I get you.
Yeah, but he didn't have to.
Probably go further back, even to, toddler age. I know if we're going to believe Elvis, he told a couple people that he had a black older neighbor that helped take care of him when his mom couldn't. And B.B. King, there's an interview from him. B.B. King, if we're going to believe him too, I do. You know, he said Elvis told him, he mentioned that to him, same thing. So this is a lifetime experience that Elvis sort of Tupelo. One writer, and I can't credit them, I wish I could, but one writer said years ago, had Elvis not had that experience in Tupelo, by the time he got to Memphis, if he was raised anywhere else in the country, Memphis would not have had the same effect on Elvis. Elvis would not have had the same experience in Memphis because Tupelo was the launch pad for Memphis was just sort of an extension of what already happened in Tupelo. So right. Elvis was already the idea of Beale Street in West Memphis or East Arkansas, where the music scene was, and black folks and the black church at East Trigg. These were things that were already, they were just part of him, and that gets lost in the history. And when people find that out, and I've learned this through many discussions on the internet. Sometimes I just play fly on the wall, but I see these debates ad nauseum almost. They're everywhere. But it's interesting. You will see people, it seems like they're learning. There's a lot of good discussions where people say, once people seem to realize Elvis, he came by it, naturally, they say. He came by it legitimately. Okay. You start to see some people say, okay, I can give Elvis his props. I can give him some credit. I didn't realize, and that, I think that's part of why we just, what we're talking about right now, I think is so important that more people understood that, and it helps give credit to some of those black folks too along the way that maybe didn't get the attention in the biographies over the years. All the people that were talked about, there are a lot of people that were written, I don't know any other way to say it, but the feeling among those of us that are aware is they've almost been written out of the history, and these are not white folks. These are not white folks. These are black folks. I mean, we've got Janice. Her maiden name is Davis. Her last name is Scales. She had brothers Eugene and James. Their family had the only piano in their black neighborhood. He was like, when the other kids were outside playing, she said sometimes Elvis was sitting in there playing the piano. Willie Pooch, he went on to be a great bluesman. He was same age as Elvis. I think he was 6 months or a year older. Willie Pooch gave a couple interviews. He said he remembered playing with Elvis. They ran through the fields. He played baseball with Elvis. Sam Bell said they all played baseball sometimes down there by, I guess, the fairgrounds. And Willie Pooch went on to Chicago, and he played with Muddy Waters and many of those guys. And he should have been in. People should know about Willie Pooch and Elvis. I mean, I'm like, when I first heard his story, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Where was this all these years? And why? There's another guy, Robert Jameson. He just passed away just not long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and he went on to be a very highly admired. He was a civil rights activist. He went on to. He knew Elvis as a child. He said that he remembered wrestling and playing marbles with Elvis, and he went on to be very active in the black community, and he was a voice for during the civil rights era, and a well-known pastor throughout the years. And I mean, I'm just probably scratching the surface here.
Well, and that's an interesting point that you made, that the Tupelo experience, because when you look at some of his peers, some of maybe you never want to name specific names, but say the generic Memphis Mafia member who grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, or any of his classmates even, who were, young white men, would have had a vastly different experience than the young Elvis Presley. And the fact that he moves to Memphis as a young teenager and is already sort of an outsider, of course he's going to latch on to the things that are familiar, and the things that are familiar are not necessarily the things from the white community, because even Red West has talked at times that Elvis, he liked football, but he wasn't a jock. He was the weird gangly kid, sitting over in the corner that would get bullied, and he wasn't the typical guy wearing the crew cut, a haircut. And he was listening to, these radio stations like WDIA, and like we were talking about, just sort of latching on to what was familiar and trying to make his own, carve out his own space in Memphis. And that plays into, by the time he starts making, serious attempts at recording music, you get the influence of, you were talking about B.B. King as an individual, and that's someone that is more well known, but they go way back, way before Elvis's professional career started. And also, we have stories that that Elvis became not close friends to begin with, but he was in the proximity of Sun Records even around the time that Johnny Bragg and the Prisonaires were recording. And then obviously later on, once he became more familiar with Sam and more familiar with Johnny, he actually became friends with Johnny.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely. Johnny Bragg's story is another one that I don't think has got the attention that it deserves. You might be aware he had a biography that he had someone help him write. I guess it'd be his autobiography called Walking in the Rain. Mm-hmm. It's a great read. It's about his life story. The whole book is great. And there's a number of anecdotes involving Elvis in there that Johnny wanted to tell. He made a point of putting in there. Mm-hmm. And many people that do research on Johnny Bragg, even oddly seem to overlook, I don't know how, but they'll tell his life story, but they tend to skate over that. But it's just another example of things getting overlooked. But there's even some Elvis historians that sort of downplay his, he implies when he sees Elvis at the mansion, at the governor's mansion, he's overheard to say, "Good to see you again, it's been a while," or something to that effect. And Elvis is like, "Yeah, good to," which plays into that Johnny always said that Elvis was with him at Sun Records, that he was there when Elvis was hanging around before he actually started recording with Scotty and Bill, and which there's a lot of evidence to support that. Mm-hmm. But as far as when he's there with Johnny Bragg, there's always been some debate, and I know Peter Guralnick and a couple other authors have sort of downplayed that Johnny. They didn't say he made it up, but there's the implication that that just didn't happen for whatever reason. But Johnny said Elvis was there and helped him with the lyrics. He helped him with the song "Walking in the Rain." Elvis actually helped him work through some of the. Now, interesting enough, Judd Phillips, Sam's brother, actually corroborates that Elvis was there. Yep. There's a statement from him in a newspaper that many people ignore, and I've got into it with one writer a couple of years ago on Facebook. I went down. I don't like doing that, but it kind of got a little ugly only because I took issue.
Got
with
ugly on Facebook. That never happened.
Yeah, I took issue, as did a few other people that were reading the thread. Is this guy? He's an author, and he was downplaying. He seemed to come from Peter Guralnick's stance that this didn't happen, and I'm like, look, I could see where there's it'd be nice to have a little more evidence to back it up, but we have enough evidence to say it's possible. You can't just dismiss it and say, well, he made it up. First of all, Johnny Bragg would have no reason to make that up. you're basically calling the guy a liar.
Right.
And it's like, that's where I have an issue is, we got to kind of we seem to see this thing but for me, maybe I was a little sensitive anyway, because I see too much evidence of this. A lot of people, black folks in particular, written out of the Elvis story. Mm-hmm. One of my black friends said that, they're like, I love what you're doing, Jay, because, a lot of us, he was speaking as a black man, but he said a lot of us have been written out of the Elvis story, and it pisses, and I'm just being honest, it ticks, I'll clean it up, but he said it ticks off black folks because a lot of us know better, and we've had to watch this for decades. Yeah. White writers, I'm just quoting, and I'm not going to say my friend's name, but if he hears this, he'll be nodding along, listening, trust me. It is too many white writers and historians have taken black folks out of the story, and it's nice to have at least some people out there wanting to, give that back, put that out there. And, there's a lot of, it's a positive thing, if more people embrace that maybe haven't. And as fans, it's a sensitive topic, and anyone that's ever seen a discussion,
Sorry, to what end though? Why do you think they would want to write that off? The black influences or the black influence on Elvis' story. What would be the purpose of that?
I'm trying to think of probably the most sensitive, fair way to put it is not necessarily intentional racism or prejudice, but there is certainly a well-known documented history in America of sort of where, especially if it's white folks, sometimes have written black folks out of the history, as my friend said. There's, we have to go back and many, not just Elvis, but a lot of different things. And in Elvis's case, we can sit here and say maybe some people just, if the writers, maybe some of these writers, if they sort of like we were talking about how you mentioned Elvis's friends, Memphis didn't have Elvis's background. So if you have people that perhaps maybe they just don't have that sensitivity to, hey, Elvis, I want to write this biography, but you know what, Elvis, he had some black friends in Tupelo. I'm going to spend a little more time trying to find these people and interview them and get them in his biography. And there seems to be this strong prevailing thing among many people, and I don't think they're wrong, that it's maybe not a conscious, on purpose effort, but it was unconscious effort to just sort of not care enough to.
Yeah, it's something that's often referred to as inherent bias, and it's very similar to, well, for even the example that we gave of Johnny Bragg making the statement that Elvis was at the very minimum present during the recording of Just Walking in the Rain. To what extent, in terms of whether he was just hanging out in the lobby or whether he was volunteering some assistance, is that's a thing that can never be borne out. But the fact that it takes Judd Phillips saying, a white man saying, oh yeah, that that also happened, why is it that we accept Judd Phillips' word for it but not Johnny Bragg's? That's sort of an example of the inherent bias.
Yeah, because on top of that, obviously Johnny Bragg went to prison, so right away they'll be like, well, we'll dismiss anything he says. He's a criminal, right?
Right.
I'd also like to point out that it's incredible that Elvis, growing up in the South, segregated South, back in the 40s and 50s, that he didn't have these, biases or any kind of bigotry in him. But that probably goes back to Vernon, and most probably Gladys more so than Vernon. The fact that they were like put upon and they were the have-nots. So they they found, I guess they found some kind of kinship with black people, and Elvis obviously must have inherited that from Gladys. What do you guys think?
Absolutely. I was going to say that's a great point. And even Vernon, I mean, he was, according to Sam Bell, he was gone quite a bit, as we know. There was, Vernon did some traveling back I know he went south of Mississippi, and he was out of town sometimes trying to find a way to make money and come back. Sam said he was gone a lot, but he remembered seeing Vernon. And he made a point of saying that Gladys fed though Sam and his friends, when they came over with Elvis, she fed them and was nice to them, just like their parents, Sam and his family and their parents were to Elvis when he came over to their houses. But Vernon, he said, he told Elvis when he built a tree house, and he had them come over, and he said he was friendly to him, and he told Elvis, share your toys. You share your toys with Sam and his friend. Elvis was both of his parents taught Elvis without, and it probably was never even a conversation. I mean, we don't know, but more just through their example of, hey, we're the same. The color thing is irrelevant here. We're all just, everybody's the same. And you're right, Gurdip, what you said about Elvis. It's almost, it is. I know older folks have said, especially those that were not white folks that grew up in the Jim Crow era, have said that it is amazing that Elvis was not. I call it a desert rose. He was like a rose growing in the desert. It's almost seems anomaly that a white young man could be raised in the Jim Crow era South, and he seemed so. And I don't know if we'll ever know, because so many people from Tupelo are gone now, if we'll ever know what Sam said, that Elvis was different from any of the other white kids, that there weren't many others really hanging around. And the older relatives of Sam's and their friends loved Elvis because he seemed so respectful and kind and gentle-natured and sweet. And I don't know if Elvis was if he was the only kid that was also white and was like that, or according to Sam, it seemed that that's the case. It certainly, and he was consistent. This seems like Elvis was like this, and we know this from people that knew him in Memphis when he, as a young man, and later in life, people that knew him. It's just something he never. There's a great story with she was a real estate lady. Her name is Myrtle Fisher. Her and Elvis were riding in a car together, and her daughter, I think. And these were black women. And she told the Tri-State Defender, it's the Black Memphis, the newspaper, and she was interviewed after Elvis passed away, and she said Elvis had said something to the effect one day in the car that, he liked talking with black folks, or he could connect better, or something to that effect. And she remembered him saying, black folks are genuine, or they're just real. Here, and this is just Elvis just sort of sitting in the car talking the way people talk, just riding, but that stuck out in her memory when she was recollecting, someone found out, I guess she knew Elvis, and she was saying, these are things that aren't even really known, but it's a little anecdote that gives us an insight to how Elvis, and I don't even know who all was in the car, if it was a car full of people, maybe a couple of his bodyguards or friends, or if it was him and Billy Smith and someone was in there, or if it was just Elvis and her. And she said she was teasing him about the way he was driving. And she said, you might can sing, but you sure can't drive. Elvis got a big laugh out of that. But I've come across many little anecdotes like that where it seemed like, it goes back to what you were saying was maybe the Elvis of Tupelo was different than the guys from Memphis.
Well,
I could go. You mentioned other. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we even earlier this month we did an episode on the week or the day rather that Elvis attended the Juneteenth celebration at the Memphis Fairgrounds in 1956, because so often.
Absolutely.
so often it's just, written as sort of a little aside that, Elvis went on colored night. But it's like, no, this was a whole thing. This is not just colored night. This is Juneteenth. This is a celebration of the end of slavery. And that this is a big thing for the black community, and that, Elvis attending, is for such a popular, on the rise white rock and roll performer, or rockabilly performer. You weren't getting Pat Boone out there on on Juneteenth. You weren't going to get, some of these other, pop, performers that are out on the top of the charts at the same time. You're not going to get Johnny Ray out there, but it's Elvis Presley that's out there.
Well, you would say it would be career suicide, right? For you to attend something like that. It might hit upon your popularity or what have you. But, I mean, it goes to show you Elvis, had his convictions. He knew what was right or wrong, and he knew going there, sure, some people might look down upon that, but he really didn't care, right?
Right.
I would say Barbara Hearn Smith, I should say. She's a good friend of ours. She's been a friend for many years, and my wife and I. And she was with Elvis. She's the one that there's a couple different photos from that night, but one of them you can see her actually in the crowd peering over the shoulder. You can see the side of her face.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't even noticed her until we were talking one night about that, and she was like, "I'm there." She goes, "That's me." And and we found the picture online, and she was pointing. And she told me, I asked her, I said, what was going on? What exactly? And she said, we came back from the theater, and we walked in the house. This is on Audubon Drive, and the reporter was hanging around Robert Johnson. And his parents and a few other people, and Elvis said, hey, let's go down to the fairgrounds tonight. And she was like, to her, it wasn't, she was like, all right, it was just something to do with Elvis. And she said, we drove down there and went to the fairgrounds gate. And they stood. It was just black folks. As you said, it's Juneteenth. It's their night, and it's unfortunate that it was relegated to just one night. But
right.
That was, but it was as you said, it's a special night for just the black community, and whites weren't supposed to be there. Well, Elvis and her come walking up, and she said the crowd everyone started kind of coming around and circling them and talking to Elvis, and they were happy to see him and inviting him to come on in. And she said it's not like they really had to say, hey, it wasn't like Elvis was like, hey, can we come in? They were like, Elvis, hey, man, come on. And they was just through the whole night. It was just, she said everything was great. They didn't have any, it was just a wonderful, positive experience. And Elvis played a bunch of games. And fortunately the photographer was able to get those great photos to at least document it. Pictures always add to the story. So
that's the thing. The pictures that tell the story, and so we've talked about that event on the show, but one that sticks out to me in particular because there is so much photographic evidence from him being there is the WDI fundraiser in December '56, and. Yep. It is maybe the most, because after 1956, Elvis is really too big to go anywhere. He doesn't attend funerals. He doesn't attend, church. He doesn't go to karate tournaments in the 70s because it's chaos. But one of the last things that he gets to do and just sort of bring down the house before it becomes too overwhelming is that he's able to attend this fundraiser at the Ellis Auditorium, and there is so much photographic evidence from this event. And I checked Elvis Presley's Graceland and the Elvis Presley social media page. Both social media pages literally do not have a single mention of WDIA or that event at all. It has never been highlighted on the social media for Elvis Presley. That he went out and was part of the activities of that evening, that they were raising money for needy African-American children.
And that plays right into a statement that some folks, black folks in Memphis over the years said, those in charge of Elvis's legacy haven't done enough to promote his connection with the black community. And that's a fair criticism. You're right. Yeah. I mean, what you said, that sort of whether it's through, I don't know if it's just accidental or it's not on their radar or something important. I'm not sure. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, I got to talk with Carla Thomas last year, and I spent an hour with her on the phone. I got a mutual friend, Ernest Withers' son, is a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
and he got me in touch with her. Hopefully, we'll get to do lunch with COVID once COVID dies down. Next time I'm in Memphis, we're supposed to join her and maybe a friend down there. But she said something that nobody ever talks about is that night at the end after the crowd chased Elvis and all 9,000 kids ran and chased Elvis to the back of the show pretty much ended. And she said once the crowd sort of settled down and Elvis signed autographs for as long as he could or talked to people, a lot of people started going home, and some of the musicians, the R&B and gospel artists, stayed behind with their kids. And she, of course, with their father being Rufus Thomas and her sister, the famous picture you guys have probably seen with Elvis, also in the 1956 picture with Venice Thomas, when she's 3 years old on Elvis's knee. She said that Elvis started performing for everyone.
Yep.
He sat at the piano and was basically singing and performing and for quite a while and really putting on sort of like a little, she said it was a vivid image that stayed with her over the years. And these are the type of things, I'm like, I thought about Baz's film and I'm like, I don't know how much beyond Sam, he's thought to research, but wouldn't it be wonderful to maybe see that's something that has never been the WDI, unless I'm incorrect, correct me if I'm wrong. I've never seen the WDIA part of his life in any film.
It's never been depicted.
Documentary, really.
No. And there were so many prominent black performers there that evening. Not only did you have B.B. King, you had Rufus Thomas, you had Lil Junior Parker, Bobby Blue Bland. There were just so many people.
Charles.
Yeah, Ray Charles was there. Yeah. So many people. And then the photos themselves were primarily taken by Ernest Withers.
I'm the king of the jungle, they call me the Tiger Man. When you cross my path, you got your own life in your hand. Well, I get up on the mountain and I call my back at back. Well, I get up on the mountain and I call my back at back. My back cat comes a running and the hound dog got way back, get back, way back.
And most of the people that, many people out there that we'll call them non-Elvis people, they don't even really know. They don't even care what B.B. King or James Brown or even Little Richard. Just in the last year, I follow a lot of old interviews, websites and archives from back in the 60s and 70s. Little Richard had tremendous amount of respect. I didn't realize till the last year or two how many times he went to bat for Elvis.
Yeah.
He actually, Little Richard had a lot of, just in between 71 and 72, he talked about how Elvis did him a favor one time. He talked about how he was getting ripped off by some artists, but he made a point of saying Elvis was not one of them. Elvis was legit. He went on to say something. He also made a statement to one interviewer, I think with New Music Magazine or New Music Express, I think it was NME Magazine, and he said one of the things he respected about Elvis was that Elvis didn't use this platform to put other people down. He wasn't trying to keep. He'd always, he basically praised other people, which is true. That's what Elvis did, and I thought it was actually particularly interesting that Ray Charles pointed that out. I've never seen anybody, not one musicologist, not one pop culture writer. Everything they had to say about Little Richard and Elvis in the same paragraph, not one of them ever mentioned Little Richard giving Elvis those props. Right. So there's definitely there's a lot more to be covered that has not been. That I think, to be fair to Elvis, he deserves, I think, a little better writing than he's, perhaps
right.
gotten.
Well, and that's
there's a fine line between him getting too much credit and too much attention, and others maybe not, but still being able to stick to the facts.
Well, that's really what it comes down to me sometimes, is that the documentary The King that came out a couple years ago, and they had some great sort of talking head segments where they brought in Van Jones, and he asked the question of the director, why are you trying to rescue Elvis? And I think it is important to remember that, like, it's not about rescuing Elvis. It's not about that. It's about making sure that Elvis doesn't get taken down, while also lifting up the voices of the other people who helped get Elvis where he was. And that's where it, to me, comes. And we had a young lady on the show our very first year, and she had written an article that was fairly critical of the documentary The Searcher, and said that there should have been more about Elvis and cultural appropriation and stuff like that. And the point that we kind of made to her was that, like, the media and the people writing stories and the people researching and writing books should take a second and ask, why isn't there a book about this artist, or why hasn't someone done a spotlight without even mentioning the name Elvis Presley? It frustrates me sometimes because I'm such a big fan of Roy Hamilton, and it's only really been within the last 2-3 years that I've even started to see his name pop up in Facebook groups and things like that, of people going, hey, wait a minute, Roy Hamilton was really influential on Elvis Presley. And I'm one of those guys who, I've been banging this drum for a long time, but it frustrates me because it's like there's so little in the way of biographical information available about him, or discographical information about him. And we just did an episode about Dudley Brooks, Elvis's pianist in the 50s, on so much of his movie material into the early 60s. And it was so hard to find biographical information about Dudley Brooks. And there's articles upon articles about Scotty Moore and about Bill Black and about DJ Fontana and James Burton. And that's great. They were remarkable artists, and they were iconic artists. They had some of the greatest and most iconic music of that era. But Dudley Brooks was on that too, and he was just as much a part of that. And so we tried to make the case of, like, hey, why is he also not getting the attention? So that's where I think it comes back to, like, we just need to make sure that we're not, even if it's just a matter of, not intentional, but just why are we neglecting these parts of the story?
Right, and that's what comes where there's got to be a sensitivity, just an understanding of pretty much what you're saying. There needs to be a sensitivity, an awareness that these, some people say, why? You see all the time, why do we got to bring up color? Or what? Why does it matter? It's not just because they're black. Well, that's because it matters. It matters to the black folks. It matters to their relatives of these artists. It matters to anybody from that era, and Elvis respected those people.
That's the thing. That's the thing, is that when Elvis Presley is in an interview in 1969 or a press conference, and they're asking him about this King of Rock and Roll thing, or even as early as 57, where he's being interviewed by Jet, and they're talking about that rumor that Elvis said, all black people can do is shine my shoes and buy my records, and he's responding to that. And he says, let's face it, I can't sing like Fats Domino can, I know that. And when you get to him in 69, and he says, look, if anybody's the king of rock and roll, let me point you to Fats Domino. And that even Elvis was trying to, in his own way, make a point of being...
deflect.
The person, not just a deflection, though. He did make a point.
I was gonna say deflect towards...
Yes,
I was going to say deflect towards...
But to say, why are you paying attention to me? Why don't you pay attention to this guy?
I know you don't love me no more. And I don't want to be hurt anymore. And yet I love so hard. Everything I've done
And that goes all the way up to a story like him repainting one of the angels in the Vegas showroom, to make sure that there was some diversity.
Which, by the way, meant a lot to his black friends.
Yes.
That's something that oddly has gotten overlooked. But
I don't know if our listeners, not everyone may have heard that story. Go ahead and tell how that came about.
He basically climbed a ladder with, and the audio is out there where he tells it himself pretty good, but he climbed a ladder. And Myrna Smith with the Sweet Inspiration, she also told it where there was a fire alarm or something went off one night where it kind of, people were corralled or told they had to sort of leave the rooms for a little while, and lights were going off and on or something like that. But anyway, Elvis, out of boredom, they went into the casino, or they went into the showroom, and he climbed, they stacked some tables together, and Elvis climbed up on a ladder, and Red and one of the other guys, they got some brown paint, and Elvis painted one of the white. They were the European, they were traditional looking European royalty of like 15th century, 16th century, King George, etc., sort of like that. And they were all white European royalty. Well, Elvis decided to paint one of them brown, one of the female princesses to look like a black princess. And he made a point on the stage the next night of telling that story. And then he said, shine the spotlight over there and look what I did.
Put the light on those statues over there. You see them creatures? Okay, put it over here. Put it over a little further. Now let me tell you what happened. About 2 nights ago, me and some guys that worked for me, we were down in the dressing room, and we were going upstairs about 4:30 in the morning. And we went backstage. We climbed up. One of the guys with me, Red West, climbed a fence as high as that curtain. Went over, got a can of black paint, put it on his belt, climbed back over, down. We came out, we stacked 2 tables up, and I painted a statue, Went back, climbed the fence again, right down, put the paint away, washed it on my fingers, and nobody knows except you, Yes. I don't know what the hotel's going to do when they find out. They'll probably hang me up there, or try to anyway.
Red West, even one of his last interviews, I think before he passed away, there's footage out there where he's on a stage somewhere talking, and he told that story. And I've seen a couple fans try to downplay that or say Elvis wasn't trying to, and it's like, come on, listen to the audio.
Yeah.
Red himself eliminates any doubt. Red said flat out, he said Elvis did that as to show respect to his black friends and to the Sweet Inspirations. It was Elvis's way of basically saying hey, look, color, there's not enough color representation in this venue. There are black folks that play. So he painted one of the figurines that was white, black, and that's a statement. I've talked about this with a couple of my friends that didn't know much about Elvis, and the phrase that comes up is actions speak louder than words. And right. Elvis might not have been a guy that pounded podiums or necessarily spoke out, but that was, my one friend said, that's a huge action, man. He was making a statement. And I said, absolutely, because how many thousands of people were in the showroom that night?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's absolutely.
Just as a quick sidebar on that, one thing that I talked about recently about in the ghetto that we've talked about before on the show is that I think some people, and we referenced it as well with If I Can Dream, but last year during the protests following George Floyd's death and everything that was happening last year, I saw a lot of Elvis fans on social media, and granted, social media is not by any means indicative of an actual majority or anything like that, but I saw a lot of examples of people pulling out If I Can Dream and In the Ghetto. And when I picked In the Ghetto as my song of the week to talk through the history of the song, I made the point that look, In the Ghetto is not a song about what's going on in the ghetto. It's a song about white indifference to what's happening in the ghetto. And that is what Elvis was trying to get across when he was performing it in Vegas. You know, when the key lines are, take a look at you and me. Are we too blind to see? Or you and me. Yeah. Or do we simply turn our heads and look the other way? That's the song. That's the point of the song. And you had so many Elvis fans that posted that song, but weeks later or months later, I see them posting, really horrendous, political posts that are just not remotely in line with that sentiment. It's like, are you listening to the words that Elvis is saying, and that he's singing and that Mac Davis wrote?
Yep, and Mac himself, a lot of people miss this. I see this on comment threads on YouTube under that song. There's some, like you said, I think there's some people that they're fans of Elvis, but they're just not getting it. They're not listening. They don't, they don't know what that song's about. And Mac made it clear himself, multiple interviews, what that song was about. And he's also on record saying Elvis took a chance with that song. That Elvis absolutely, it wasn't something that, not something that maybe a lot of artists would have taken on or done. And it is a song about white indifference. Elvis knew that. Mac wrote it with that in mind. And there are some fans that try to twist that or downplay that. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's nice that, I'm not the only one I know I'm not the only one, but it feels like not enough people really
get that.
That. So
I think people hear the song, but they don't actually listen to it.
Yep.
For some dope, so I hang out with the rat and roach, and still broke, cause I'm sleeping on the apartment floors. The judges get up, kick, when they smoke a brick. I never seen a drug dealer ever call it quits. The hood struggle is to make it, gotta get the change. See, every day is like a dark cloud full of rain. The feds tapping for what's dangerous when you hood trapping. So don't get lost in the sauce, slinging cold crackling.
I just want to know, we didn't get into his history. How did you become an Elvis fan, actually, in the start?
Well, I kind of, probably like some people, a lot of people, it started with my mom, just as a kid. I was a young child in the 70s, and I just remember that I had a neighbor kid that was playing Burnin' Love when it came out, or maybe a couple of years after it came out. We were listening to the 45. That was my first memory of a guy named Elvis Presley and hearing Burnin' Love. And I think, I might be wrong, someone can look it up out there, but the American, I think whatever was, keep thinking American Trilogy was on the other side of that 45. I don't know if when it was released what was on the other side, but and then he passed away a few years later, and I remember the news. I remember even I was young, that just the national, the TV and radio, that was all everywhere. And I remember being out with my mom, and she started crying when it came over the radio, and I just remember being young, but I had an awareness right away that somebody really famous and important or special must, passed away, and as I went on and got older, I just sort of his movies and some of his music. I told Justin that really most of my research went towards a lot of the stuff that we're talking about because of my interest in the civil rights era and the Jim Crow era. And I've researched other people and civil rights activists, and I found Elvis's name popping up in places that I never would have expected, and nor have I really heard other people mention. And so that's really what sent me down this huge rabbit hole a few years ago, as I started going, wait a minute, I keep seeing Elvis's name come up, some of these people that were involved in the civil rights movement and stuff that even Guralnick didn't mention, and I sort of started making my own notes, and that's when I ended up creating this group after I sort of had a couple of years of this. But I know you've only got so much time here to cover. Yeah. We didn't get into Andrew Young or
let's do that real quick, because I think that's worth talking about. Let's talk real quick about Elvis and the movement, particularly those individuals and Dr. King, of course.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we? What I want to touch on is Reverend Brewster real quick.
Yeah. Sure.
Everyone knows he's the pastor of East Trigg Church, the black church in Memphis that Elvis went to. The thing that is often overlooked, that irks me a little bit, he doesn't. is the thing that's missed by a lot of older folks from Memphis. They know this, and civil rights folks know this, but outside of that, Elvis community and most people don't talk about it. Is Reverend Brewster was a hardcore, very reputable activist. He was a relentless voice for the black community and spoke on injustice. He was also, we know that Thomas Dorsey is well known, arguably the most reputable gospel. He's the father of gospel music. Most musicologists and writers of gospel music, they cite Thomas Dorsey as the father of gospel music.
Yeah,
well, Reverend Brewster is considered his heir apparent.
I was going to jump in. For folks who may not be familiar, Thomas Dorsey wrote "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" and "Peace in the Valley."
Absolutely, yep. And Brewster wrote some 200-something gospel songs. He is considered by many Dorsey biographers. Brewster is written as sort of like his protege. He was like the next. Reverend Brewster is considered one of the greatest gospel writers of the 20th century, songwriters. So beyond the Elvis story, he's often it drives me crazy because it's always, he's the black pastor of the East Street Church. Well, no, he's actually was a powerful activist that was highly respected, and he was one of the greatest gospel songwriters. We're sort of undercutting, without it being intentional, we're downplaying the value of Reverend Brewster, of what he was so much even more. He's the guy I love about him is he's the guy where a lot of activists back then, they had to be careful because white folks back then were always trying to stop the movement or cause problems for activists. And there was a well-known thing among black leaders and speakers that you had to watch out because there were some white folks posing as friends of the movement, or they were hiding around listening, and they would cause trouble. They would call their homes, they would threaten their families, they would threaten their lives if you said the wrong, if you got too militant, if you got too outspoken. And there were a lot of black folks that were a little nervous about that. And Brewster was the guy that some of those other people and the leaders in Memphis said Brewster was the guy. He was like, oh, so you got white folks threatening we better not speak at this rally? Hold my coffee cup and watch this. And he'd go and he'd get on the podium and he'd say whatever he felt black community needed to hear. He did not care. He was an incredibly brave and a powerfully driven, just a man to be. I have utmost respect. Everything I've read about him, I'm just so it kind of in Memphis history, to me, he's like just one of those people that like you can't speak enough about this guy. He's really a fascinating individual, and he's always just people like, oh, Reverend Brewster was the East Street Church, but he's
he's more than that.
And
so
it's
much more than that.
Right. And when we tie him to Elvis history, it's important because his respect for Elvis was also unrelenting. He was always consistent, and he actually had a lot of great things, more than just there's a video out there, but more than that, he gave other statements in the press. He praised Elvis as a gospel singer. He talked about Elvis's humanity and a friend of the community and his generosity. And, there's a lot of things he said that should be better known, but Brewster is one of those people where his voice holds even more weight than just saying he was the black pastor at the church Elvis went to. It's like it's another case of if people understood more, we could raise Reverend Brewster's name up by telling that story better.
It's a matter of that cultural context isn't there. We're not members of the black community in the 50s and 60s in Memphis. So we don't have the same, reference point when someone says Reverend Herbert, W. Herbert Brewster of the East Trigg Avenue Baptist Church. Right. That means nothing to someone who doesn't know.
And this is where historians have to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew Young, we talked about, we could get into him.
Yeah.
Well, just Andrew Young was the ambassador to the United Nations, and he was Martin Luther King's partner in the movement. He's pretty much everywhere. You Google Andrew Young, Martin Luther King. He was with him when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and he in 1965 he did an interview for Scope Scope magazine. It was the Scope Project was an initiative started by Martin Luther King, and it basically was, I believe it stands for Summer Community Organization and Political Education. I'm going off memory, but it was part of the SCLC, where it was a voter registration civil rights initiative. And the Scope Project had an interview with Andrew Young. And this is the heart of the civil rights movement in 1965. And Andrew Young is basically, he's talking about how music helped to sort of, rock and roll music, it sort of helped in ways that maybe other forms of music or other organizations and entities couldn't have helped the movement. He saw some integration happen. He says, I say all the time that rock and roll did more for integration than the church. And if I was going to choose who I was going to let into the kingdom, I might have to choose Elvis Presley. There's also a follow-up statement here I had saved where it's from the book. The book is called The Devil's Music. It was written by Randall J. Stevens, is the author. Randall J. Stevens, The Devil's Music, How Christians Inspired, Condemned, and Embraced Rock and Roll. And he says, at another time later on, Andrew Young said, I'm trying to talk like I know a little anthropology here, but that basically the important cultural bridge between the Negro world and the white world was bridged by Elvis Presley and the rock and roll movement. That integration would be extremely difficult on a high school and at a grade school level if it had not been for some certain cultural commonalities, which I think the secular music world provided for America. And I think this is very important.
I think that gets down to all the criticisms that I've seen, which can be fairly made, I think, at times, depending on the context, that Elvis did not and was not, the type of person who was out at marches. He was not the person who was, writing protest songs. He was not the person recording protest songs. He was not, that guy. But at the same time, you have to wonder if you, again, it's something that I talk about sometimes on the show, that I think sometimes the context is lost because we weren't there. Young people today were not there to experience that level of segregation and racism and the integration of cultures together in the way that it happened and how segmented it really was before then. That for people just to say, or historians to just say that Elvis did it, doesn't really mean anything. And it really takes looking at people like Andrew Young, who of all the people would have the most reason to say any other name than Elvis Presley at that moment. Chooses to say Elvis Presley.
Right. Exactly.
Let me ask you guys this. Do you think, obviously, we don't know Elvis's mindset. We know, he was, he had open mind when it came to other cultures. But do you think he was swayed at all by Tom Parker not to get involved in political movements, especially in the 60s?
I feel like, just like with that part of his career, it'd be the same as with his acting career. There's stuff where Elvis wanted to do serious films, but the Colonel was always, he had a different plan, and Elvis was locked under contracts to do musicals. The Colonel was certainly not going to help Elvis be that person, that actor that he wanted to be. Mm-hmm. The Colonel was Elvis. If Elvis wanted to be a voice, if he wanted to maybe take a more vocal stance on things that were wrong or address some things, the Colonel was not somebody that was going to support that. We know from some interviews of people close to Elvis that they witnessed him. Nobody talks about it. He called out a director on a film set for harassing the minorities, for disrespecting minorities. Elvis was the one that jumped up and told the director, knock it off.
That happened in front of
Elvis called out a couple of his guys. Yep. Elvis did in his own way throughout his life. He showed that, hey, I don't stand for, I don't stand for mistreatment of people, of minorities, or anyone, but it wasn't on a level of getting in front of a camera and saying, "Hey, listen to me, America."
I was just going to say that criticism that is sometimes waged in Elvis's direction, I think, comes from a perspective of that. To be fair, Elvis has the biggest platform pretty much in human history. He's the biggest individual superstar of the communication age, television, records. He's the first person as an individual who's able to reach that level of global success, and that he doesn't verbally take a stand and say those things. And to me, it really comes down to, did he have to, if his actions were in and of themselves in the 50s, his music, right, if his music was the catalyst, does he have to change the world? How many times do you expect one person to change the world?
Right. How much is right? How much is fair to maybe? Well, right, and that's the thing. I think it's fair to question or ask, but like you're saying, how much is fair to maybe expect of one person? You could counter and say, is it really fair to put that on one? How much more was Elvis to do other than what he originally did? Just coming out, he took all that criticism for doing that music, and some folks said a lot of artists would have ran off into the mountains and said, I don't need all this hate. I'm out of here. Elvis, he took a lot of hate, and that should be enough. Some could say he had the biggest platform. He could have done more.
To throw in a quick 2 cents on that, I think I've seen even very recently some Elvis fans use the clip of Elvis when prompted about other political issues, about Vietnam and things like that, and him saying, I'm just an entertainer, that he declines to say that other people shouldn't be able to speak up, but he doesn't make a statement himself. And I've seen Elvis fans say that he's a great example of why artists shouldn't talk politics. And I go, that's not what Elvis was saying.
Thank you. Yep, I say that all the time. I said, if you listen to the video, he clearly says no when they ask, are you saying other entertainers should not express their views? And he says no.
Oh, Mr. Presley, on the subject of this service, what is your opinion of war protesters, and would you today refuse to be drafted?
Honey, I just seem to keep my own personal views about that to myself, because I'm just an entertainer, and I'd rather not say.
Do you think other entertainers should keep their views to themselves, too?
No. I can't even say that.
It goes back to the In the Ghetto thing, where people who listen to In the Ghetto don't even hear that and don't even take that seriously. What the message that's in that. What makes you think that they're going to take something that's more explicit seriously when they don't even take the subtle thing?
Well, let me just before we wrap it, let me go ahead and just throw this out there.
Yeah.
I've got this screenshot to save it. I saved it. It's one of Elvis's inner circle guys that we were talking on private message back and forth occasionally. I was impressed that I was able to he responded occasionally, and we got to talking about Martin Luther King, and he told me that Elvis wanted to say something to the country. And I said I had heard that. I thought it was a rumor. I wasn't really sure, and he said, no, it's true. And I said, what happened with that? Do you know what he wanted to say? And he said, I don't know exactly. Elvis was tore up, and he was, deep, pretty much, as we've heard, he was in his feelings about that, and that he was a fan of Martin Luther King, and he had something he felt like he wanted to say, and the Colonel shut it down. He said that's what happened. He said the Colonel basically it was he'll call the networks and have them pull the Colonel was good at being intimidating, and he basically pulled the Colonel basically he told Elvis he said I didn't hear it, I wasn't there, but he basically told Elvis, you try to say something and it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And no one knows that. No writer has covered that. That person, I guess, never felt like telling them that in one of those documentaries. It's one of those sort of where beyond what he said, there's it's sort of interesting to ponder if Elvis would that change his whole legacy? How much would it have mattered to America? It certainly, I think, would have it'd been interesting had he taken 5 minutes and been given 5 minutes to sit there, and sort of grieve with those that were grieving at that time, and just say whatever he. Of course, Steve Binder implied that If I Can Dream was it. That was Elvis's 5 minutes. That's basically what they felt.
Well, we had heard when I was doing research for If I Can Dream as my song of the week, there was some research that I came across that Elvis was originally supposed to give a speech, and that If I Can Dream was the replacement for that.
That sounds about right. That sounds like something from Steve Binder. So, yeah.
So, and that's kind of where I think is a good place to end. And this month has been an interesting ride talking about the history of Elvis and the black community and the individuals, the musicians that inspired him or worked alongside him, his friends, his colleagues, whose stories are just as important and lived just as full of lives as Elvis Presley did, but their names and their stories are often dismissed or forgotten or overwritten, and that's why I wanted to have you on and talk about some of this history that you've dug up, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I'm sure.
And I really appreciate. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm sure Gurdip probably feels the same way.
Yes, of course. If people want to follow you on Facebook and your group, how can they do that?
Well, it's just Black Lives Matter to Elvis Facebook group, and we it is a serious. It's not the typical Elvis group, so because we do focus on we do focus on other artists, in particular artists that rhythm and blues artists and gospel artists. And we sometimes discuss issues of that era or the stuff in the context that we're discussing here.
Yeah.
But anybody that would have an interest in that stuff in particular, we always welcome to join. We're kind of cautious, we're careful because we know it's not a group for everybody. We have sadly had some Elvis fans join and leave, and that sent us a pretty strong message that we kind of, unfortunately, that's fine. There's plenty of Elvis groups out there.
Wait. So you guys don't talk about how good looking he is and all his pictures and how dreamy his eyes are. You don't talk about
that. No, we actually do have some of the fans, especially the lady fans, that do like there are some pictures on there that we. And I do want to give a shout out to I don't know if I'll at least say their first names is Craig and Latoya and Rosalind are my admins. They are my anchor, and it takes some help, and they're with me pretty much every step of the way. And we so we really appreciate, like you said, Black History Month. I think it's a good as good a month as any to discuss this, and I appreciate you all having an interest in this and wanting to talk about it. So.
For sure.
Thanks so much.
Yes, and only for my true love was waiting. If I could hear his heart softly pounding, he was lying by me, and I'd lie in my bed once again.
All right, and we're back. Thank you again for the excellent interview, and I think it's time to dive into Song of the Week.
Let's do it.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley.
Well, since my baby left me,
well, the memories are lingering in my heart. Ooh, I feel my temperature rising. He wrote upon it, return to sender, address on. But the man who can sing when he hasn't got a thing, he's a king of the whole wide world. Viva, Viva Las Vegas.
I I think you are up first.
Yeah, so something a little different this week. We're actually doing the song that was voted upon by our patrons over at patreon.com/TCBcast. At the higher levels, they actually get to submit songs to be included on a poll, and then the entire community votes. And they decided that this month, one of us was going to have to cover from Mark Potter, who made the request, "I Washed My Hands in Muddy Water."
I was born in Macon, Georgia. They kept my daddy, in the Macon jail. He told me, if you keep your hands clean, you won't hear them bloodhounds on your trail.
But Mark said, in his nomination, he said that "I Wash My Hand in Muddy Water" is a song that floats through my skull from time to time and hangs around. So thank you, Mark, for the suggestion, and let's go ahead and dive into the history of the song. Okay. So this was written by Joe Babcock, a.k.a. Cowboy Joe Babcock. He was born in the great state of Nebraska, just like yours truly, and became interested in country music at a very young age. Following his service in the Army, he ended up, he traveled around a bit, but he ended up in Nashville working with Marty Robbins as both a songwriter and a band member. And Marty recorded several of his songs. Maybe the most notable was on his sequel album, Return of the Gunslinger. He did a song called "Doggone Cowboy" that was written by Joe Babcock. Later on, Joe joined the vocal group The Nashville Edition. They recorded with a ton of major country artists, basically from the 60s through the 90s.
He joined New Edition along with Bobby Brown?
No. Nashville Edition.
Wouldn't that be something?
Right? It's like, little did you know. Cowboy Joe Babcock joining up with New Edition.
That would be amazing.
Right?
They're all dressed in their sparkly gear, and he rocks up with his cowboy outfit. Oh, God.
So, but he was backing Charlie Rich, Ronnie Millsap, Merle Haggard, Lynn Anderson, just a ton of country artists for, a good 4 decades, and including Elvis Presley. On one particular session in the early 70s was a session where they recorded "That's What You Get for Loving Me," "Early Morning Rain," and "Amazing Grace." The Nashville Edition showed up and sang backup. So you actually get to hear him a little bit as part of the backing vocals on those songs. And then later on, some of the members of the Nashville Edition also served as backup vocalists for the show Hee Haw. Pretty much for its entire run, I think from starting in 1968 all the way through into the 90s. They were regular performers on Hee Haw as backup singers. And Cowboy Joe Babcock is still around. As of 2018, he was actually still releasing music. He had an album in 2018 called Swingtown, which was sort of traditional country swing. But we'll get to that in a second, because there's actually a version of "I Wash My Hands in Muddy Water" on that. But let's dive back. The first version that came out was by an artist by the name of Stonewall Jackson in 1964.
I wash my hands in muddy water. Wash my hands, but they didn't come clean. Tried to do like Daddy told me, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream.
Have you heard Stonewall's original version?
Nope.
It's not bad. It's very classic country. It has a good backbeat, but his vocal is almost over exaggerated in how very cleanly he enunciates the lyrics. But it did pretty well for him. It reached number 8 on the country charts, but it was not the biggest hit that there would be with the song. That would be Johnny Rivers in 1966. But just before Johnny Rivers did it, Charlie Rich cut it in 1965. And Charlie Rich does an interesting thing where he takes this extremely country song and he adds a little bit of rhythm and blues, and he puts on a bit of a blues rhythm very similar to Chuck Berry's Memphis, Tennessee, sort of a dun 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 dun. It's very much like that, and it's a little slower still, not quite as slow as Stonewall Jackson's, but Charlie Rich allows himself to, slide around a little on the lyrics and give it a little bit more of a rhythm and blues groove.
But I fell in with bad companions about the man up in Tennessee. They called me way up in Nashville. They locked me up and they threw away the key. Well, I wash my hands in muddy water. I wash my hands.
I don't know if you've heard Charlie Rich's version, but I know you've heard Johnny Rivers because you mentioned it on our episode when we reviewed Elvis Country back in TCBcast 53.
From what I remember, I enjoyed that version of the song. I'd have to re-listen to it right quickly, but from what I remember, I enjoyed it. Probably not as much as Elvis's.
Yeah, he takes Charlie Rich's sort of arrangement, but amps up the tempo quite a bit and adds hand claps. And interestingly enough, on the original Stonewall Jackson one, sort of buried in the mix, you can actually hear that there's organ playing on it. But Charlie Rich pulled that
instrument
out. But Johnny Rivers brings it back, and along with sort of the hand clapping gospel vocals, it adds sort of a real Southern gospel feel to the song. And it became a pretty good hit for Johnny Rivers. It was, I think, a hit number 19, so it was only like just barely in the top 20 of the pop charts, but it still made it.
I wash my hands in muddy water. I wash my hands, but they didn't come clean. I tried to do like my dad told me. Now I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. I asked the jailer, I said, when's my time up?
And that's maybe the most popular version that has been done of the song. So that was sort of interesting to listen to. And then just as a quick aside, Johnny Hallyday, often known as the French Elvis, also the same year, 1966, did a version which is extremely faithful to Johnny Rivers' arrangement of it. I think it was almost more of like okay, he just did this song, I'm just going to do it, but translate the lyrics into French, because it's very close. But the one thing that Johnny Hallyday does that even Johnny Rivers didn't do is that he does add a little bit of a horn section, sort of punching up, sort of the accompaniment, which is something that Felton Jarvis, I think, takes a little influence from on the album version of Elvis's.
Un matin, au ciel trop lourd, accompagné de trois vauriens, nous avons fait un coup pour rien. Les poches pleines de vide, nous avons couru. J'ai mis les mains dans une autre salle.
So what do you think of Elvis's version? Where did you first hear it, and what do you think?
Obviously, I heard it on the album Elvis Country first when I bought the LP. And as I said, the only reason I bought that, because it was so cheap, I think it was like $10. We know I'm not a huge country fan. So there was only a select few tracks I liked on it. And this one was, it was okay to me back then. I was like, it's all right. But I've grown to appreciate it. I love Elvis's delivery on this. It's great. And then listening to the undubbed version in that recent box set that came out, yeah, it's great. What about you? Where did you hear it?
I actually first heard this on the Essential 70s Masters set, which is sort of an interesting place to get introduced to it, too, because when you go back and you listen to the original version that's on the album, it's a pretty highly edited down version of the song on Elvis Country. Elvis actually only recorded this in one take. This was recorded at an overnight session from June 7th and 8th. And there's only one take, and Elvis just kind of sort of blasted through it in about 5 minutes and 20 seconds or so. And the version that appeared on Elvis Country is just under 4 minutes. And for the master, Felton added in a horn section and sort of dampened down a lot of the rock elements and tried to make it feel more like a country song.
What'd you do, son? I wash my hands in muddy water. Wash my hand, oh, but it didn't come clean. Tried to do like my daddy told me, yeah, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream.
In that 70s box set, they clipped out the I Was Born 10,000 Years Ago between each song, right?
They did.
Okay.
So that was the thing with that, is that on the Essential 70s master set, not only do you get all of the songs from Elvis Country without the linking bits of music, but you also get, in the case of I Wash My Hands in Muddy Water, an extended version that's almost a minute longer. They still cut off and they fade out just before the end. What's interesting about, so if you go back and you actually listen to off the most recent From Elvis in Nashville set that just came out last year, it's the full, pretty much unedited version. And at the very end of it, you actually get Elvis at the very end shouting, "Oh shit!" Which is why it's cut off just a few seconds early on the 70s master set.
Well, I tried to do like my daddy told me, dear Lord, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. Yeah, oh shit! Yeah, to keep my hands clean.
But it's pretty close to the full version of it on that. And so that's where I first heard it, was the much longer, not alternate take, but the unedited, but still sort of edited version of it. But then obviously my favorite has been, since I heard it on one of the FTDs, I think it was the Elvis Country FTD, and then obviously now on From Elvis in Nashville, the full, completely unedited version of it is far and away my favorite of it. And
were you a fan back then or no?
Yeah, so when I first heard it on the Essential 70s master set, I actually really, really liked the song because it is a rock song. And that's very apparent as you listen to it. And I would actually argue that this is the logical conclusion of this song being taken from country music and, by Charlie Rich and Johnny Rivers, given a little bit of a, Charlie Rich adds some rhythm and blues, and then Johnny Rivers adds a few more, rock and gospel elements. But then it's Elvis Presley is the one who actually sort of brings it all together and amps it up to 11 and turns it into a straight up rock song. Because, you got James Burton in there with these screaming guitar solos. You've got Charlie McCoy blasting away on the harmonica. David Briggs is pulling out some crazy mad Jerry Lee Lewis style licks on the piano, and Elvis is just tearing into this with the same sort of ferocity that he had on the stuff from the 68 special and a little bit from the 69 stuff. And even by the end of it, Elvis starts getting a little silly and he starts sort of scatting along and snorting and swallowing, which adds to sort of that raw feeling of the entire thing.
Wash my hands, I tried to do like my daddy told me, good Lord, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. Wash my hands in muddy water.
What do you think? Do you think it leans more rock or more country?
Yeah, I'd say the pendulum goes more toward rock than country, but to me it's close because I still detect lots of country in it. No.
Well, so here's where I go back, re-listen, listen to what James Burton is doing on his guitar. It is way harder rocking than Burning Love ever is.
No, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, go back and listen to it.
I gotta go back and listen.
it didn't come clean.
You gotta go check it out. And again, listen to also what David Briggs is doing on the piano, and you can totally hear the influence of a guy like Jerry Lee Lewis just going mad, or a Little Richard.
Okay. If you're wrong, I'm going to call you and tell you you're wrong, sir.
Okay. I'll wait for it. But interestingly enough, Elvis never performed it live, and only revisited it during the That's the Way It Is rehearsals in July 1970. And these are much more relaxed. Elvis is sort of just running through just a hodgepodge of songs. Like, he's going back and dipping into like the 50s well.
Yeah.
This is where we get, some of that stuff of him doing, like I Was the One and Baby Let's Play House and Don't. Alongside the songs that he's quote unquote supposed to be rehearsing for this engagement.
Yeah.
But Elvis doesn't really commit to it. At times he seems distracted. He's not delivering a committed vocal performance like you get on the master. James Burton seems to be having fun sort of coming up with new riffs on these rehearsals. But by the end of the second one, Elvis is making like weird sounds to the melody, like he's doing like a weird nasally. It's so weird. But yeah, unfortunately, Elvis never performed it live, so it just sort of ended up on the Elvis Country album and then never went further than that, which I think is a shame, because I think that if they had the foresight, this could have been a pretty solid, at the very least, a solid country hit for Elvis on the country chart if they had issued it as a single. But they didn't. I just real quick, other versions. There's been a handful over the years, primarily covering Stonewall Jackson's version, but there were just a couple that I did want to talk about since Elvis did it. In 2009, a CD was released called Stonewall Jackson and Super Friends, a tribute, and it was essentially a tribute album to Stonewall Jackson. This track specifically includes Waylon Jennings, Marty Stewart, Charlie Daniels, Mark Colley, and Stonewall Jackson himself, sort of trading off the verses. It's a bit slower in tempo, sounds like a pretty typical Nashville arrangement for like an 80s or 90s country song, sort of not quite full-on outlaw country, but it definitely has that feel of sort of an 80s country song. I would actually guess, considering that Waylon Jennings died in 2002, that it was probably recorded sometime in the late 80s or early 90s.
Yeah, wash my hands in muddy water. I wash my hands, but they didn't come clean. Tried to do like Daddy told me, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream.
But it's not bad.
Are they the Super Friends?
Apparently. I don't know which one of them is Wonder Woman, but
that was this odd phrasing.
Wonder Twin powers activate.
There you go.
And then, as I was alluding to at the beginning, in 2018 on Joe Babcock's album Swingtown, he pulls out a new version of it, which has a very old-timey country feel. It is down-home country music, the whole works. And it's actually pretty fun. Like, it's not too badly delivered considering his age. It's not bad. I like it.
Nice.
Well, ask that jailer, when's my time up? He said, son, we won't forget. And if you try real hard and keep your hands clean, we may make a good man of you yet. And I could wait and do my sentence. I broke out.
So if you like country music, it's definitely checking out, and it's definitely very firmly in that genre of country swing, sort of pulling it back from the grips of, Elvis Presley and Johnny Rivers, and really putting that country stamp back on it. But it's definitely not bad. And the song itself, I didn't dig too deeply into the lyrics, but essentially it's just a song about a guy who breaks out of prison and goes on the run. And he talks about how he can hear the bloodhounds on his trail, and that he was sort of fated to be a criminal because he quote unquote washed his hands in muddy water, and that he was always dirty.
Sounds like Andy Dufresne from The Shawshank Redemption when he crawls through that pipe of
there you
muck and finally comes out the other side.
Exactly.
Cool.
So, but that's my song of the week. Excellent choice from, again, Mark Potter over on our Patreon.
Excellent. Great pick. All right. My song of the week is one of those light ones that some people love, some people hate. But I'm on that latter, or the former category, not the latter. Moonlight Swim from 1961 from the film Blue Hawaii.
Let's go on a moonlight swim, far away from the crowd, all alone upon the beach. Our lips and our arms close within each other's reach. We'll be on a moonlight swim.
Written by Ben Wiseman and Sylvia D. Wiseman we've talked about many, many times in the past, and I think I brought up Dee when discussing a previous song of the week she wrote, which was Suppose. Dee was like a novelist and a copywriter in New York before trying her hand at songwriting. Her most known songs are probably The End of the World for Skeeter Davis and Too Young for Nat King Cole. That song, End of the World, man, what a ridiculous overstatement those lyrics are. And I think we've talked about this off mic before, where it's like, why does the sun keep shining? Why does this sea rush to shore? Don't they know it's the end of the world because you don't love me anymore? Like, seriously? Do teen girls or even teen boys really think like that?
Yes.
Are they that infatuated with a person where they're like, why do the birds keep singing?
And not
don't
even
they
teens,
know?
even adults.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I guess I was one of the.
You were
maybe
cold.
I was odd.
Cold as ice.
I was cold. Yeah, I didn't like. Obviously, I went out with. Maybe because I didn't have a girlfriend really in high school. Like I went out on dates, but I had no one like steady. Maybe that was the problem. It was me. I'm the odd person.
You had no hard commitments.
I did not.
You don't have that investment, I didn't. Like imagine if like it was your wife or something, you'd feel like the world was ending.
That's true. That's true.
See?
But here, this is meant for teen people, no? And
I mean, not
they
necessarily,
don't have significant others.
I mean, certainly there's a chunk of the teen, record buying public that was going to buy it, but it's geared at everyone. Mm-hmm. It's relatable. So
I always think it was just so funny. Anyway, let's get back to Moonlight Swim and not the end of the world. So I didn't know that Elvis wasn't the first artist to record this song. I just assumed this was, written for the film, but it wasn't. So in 1957, Nick Noble released the first version of the song, and it reached number 37 on the Billboard charts. Noble was like a somewhat popular artist in the mid-50s with his pop hits. His most popular was A Fallen Star from Mercury Records. His version of Moonlight Swim isn't too bad. Similar to groups like the Four Lads or Perry Como or the Four Preps, that kind of sound. We have a few beach sound effects on it, like water going on, along with Noble sounding like he's in the water when he says the word moon. So it sounds like a reverb, or maybe it's just him pretending he's underwater blowing bubbles. It's okay the first few times he does it, but then after you're like, okay, enough, I get it. It's like, I don't want to keep hearing you say that word. Like,
that's so interesting. I've never heard this. I'll have to check it out.
Very, very strange.
I'll keep you warm. so very warm, from your head to your feet. Let's go on a moonlight swim. We're in love and above there's a crazy gold balloon. Sits winking down and inviting us to come on in. On a moonlight swim. On a moonlight swim.
Still, I don't mind it. And we also get that ukulele accompaniment, kind of like Elvis's version. And another person who released a version in 57 was Anthony Perkins and Norman Bates himself.
Huh.
Now, Tony actually released a few pop albums and singles in the 50s. His version is similar to Noble's without those sound effects and the vocal effects. But I don't know why hearing Perkins sing this gives me a creepy feel considering how iconic his Norman Bates performance was. It's like, let's go on a moonlight swim so I can later dismember you.
Let's go on a moonlight swim, far away from the crowd, all alone upon the beach. Our lips and our arms close within each other's reach. We'll be on a moonlight swim.
And we also have two finished versions of the song from 58 and 59. The first is from Marty Ovanen, and the other is from Tula Spinosius. Marty's is similar to the previous two.
Kaunis on hohde sen uimme kultaan aaltojen. Voin kanssasi löytää myös taivaan sinisen, kun näin uimme kuuhun päin.
Tula's is interesting because it's the first time we hear it from the female point of view. Not too bad at all, and I believe it's actually from a film because you can hear her singing it on a clip from YouTube.
Se päättyä vois, lähtekäämme kuuhun näin.
And then, yeah, finally, let's get to Elvis's. This was recorded on March 22nd, 1961 at Radio Recorder Studio B in Hollywood during the Blue Hawaii sessions. It's interesting listening to the other version. It's surprising how close they followed those original versions musically. And it's strange, they didn't change much except for the addition of the backup vocalists. And another interesting thing is we get female vocalists backing Elvis up instead of the Jordanaires here. These were later overdubbed on March 28th, and it features Louis Jean Norman, Dorothy McCarty, Virginia Rees, and Betty Allen. Considering the scene the song was used in, the film probably dictated that they be used instead of the Jordanaires. Although it's puzzling that for the album version they weren't omitted like other singers typically would be, because they actually get their own lines as well, right? Besides the Jordanaires, as a rule, everyone was pretty much taken out.
Let's go on a moonlight swim. To the rest we can race, and for just a little while I'll sit and pretend that you're on a desert isle with me.
On a moonlight swim.
On a moonlight swim.
Now, as I said, I know the song isn't loved by a majority of Elvis fans, but I don't know. I think it has a charm similar to something like Song of the Shrimp or Cane and a High Starch Collar. It's just poppy fun that you can throw on when you're just relaxing or cruising near a beach. Vocally, we've talked about how great Elvis was at this point, but it's nice to hear him harmonizing with female vocalists. What do you think of the song? And obviously, you probably first heard it on Blue Hawaii soundtrack.
Yeah. The first... So, I enjoyed it on the Blue Hawaii soundtrack. I do recall, and I don't know if you're going to get into this, but I remember vividly when I was a young fan hearing a version that purportedly was an Elvis home recording of him singing it at home, and it had like an overdubbed female vocalist singing it with him.
Let's go on a moonlight swim, far away from the crowds all alone upon the beach. reach. Our lips and arms close within each other's reach. We'll be on the moonlight swim. Oh, the air is fresh with kisses are so sweet. I'll keep you warm.
So which one was this again? Sorry.
It was a version that was, again, purportedly a home recording of Elvis.
I am gonna get into this.
Okay.
So let's get in. Let's put a cork in that, and we'll get into that.
In the film itself and on the album, I've always really liked this. It almost has sort of a hypnotic quality to it.
Yeah, it's nice, bubbly, fun. It's nothing serious or whatever. Okay, so they did 4 takes, with 3 being the master. As I said, that was later overdubbed. Take 1 is a false start where Elvis misses his cue because he's waiting for that gap where the background vocalist will be. This is interesting. So Elvis knew that it would be overdubbed later because he says they're singing right here, right? Meaning, the part where he's silent. So he knew that he had to leave those gaps in for the female vocalists.
Oh, they're still singing here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They take the second 8. We can race to the right. You come in. On a moonlight swim.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Take 2 is complete, but it's very similar to the master. And take 4 is called the alternate master, where it starts with Elvis just saying no take 4 for some reason. And this was actually released on that close-up box set. Again, very similar to the master, just slightly different phrasing.
Oh, the air is cold with kisses oh so sweet. I'll keep you warm, so very warm, from your head to your feet. Now let's go on a moonlight swim. We're in love and above there's a crazy gold balloon.
And so the song was released on the Blue Hawaii soundtrack on October 20th, 1961, and sold like a cajillion copies. I don't know. It was like crazy amounts. I think almost everybody probably had that album somewhere. Yeah. It's like issued to people. You don't have it yet? Here you go. And you can watch Elvis perform the song in the film along with the 5 girls or women he's chaperoning, and they provide the backup vocals. Very obviously rear screen projection going on, but it's fine. With the youngest one, I think, is Ellie. She's like displaying tons of attitude. That's a film we have to get to still.
Totally.
So now the other curiosity, what you talked about earlier, there was a 2002 bootleg called The Long Lost Home Recordings from a Czech Fan Club. And it was supposed to contain lost home recordings by Elvis, but apparently people think it's fake. So I listened to this version of Moonlight Swim, and it sounds a lot like Elvis. So I don't know. Obviously, it can be faked. And it's supposed to be from 61, and it came from the Colonel's collection.
With kisses of so sweet, I'll keep you warm, so very warm, from your head to your feet. Let's go home,
What do you think? Because you said you've heard it.
Yeah, I mean, so on the Elvis side of it, it's pretty damn close.
Close. This one, for some reason, hasn't been confirmed. So
yeah.
Maybe, obviously you're going to play a clip, so maybe your listeners can, tell us what they think. Do you
Judge
think
for
this
themselves.
is? Yeah. Do you think this is Elvis? And what do you think? Let us know. So, lastly, in 1971, Nora Honor, who's like a famous Filipino actress and singer, recorded a version. I don't mind this at all because I really like her accent. It adds a little charm to the recording, and she's accompanied by Tirso Cruz the third, who made a bunch of teeny bopper films with Honor. I believe the duo was known as Guy and Pip to their fans, and they were like the love team of Filipino cinema. They're very popular. I had no idea about this. I only learned about this as I was researching. But anyway, she follows Elvis's recording pretty close, except for a few lyric changes here and there. But very nice. He really has a nice voice.
Let's go on a moonlight
moonlight swim. We're in love and above there's a crazy gold balloon. Let's sit so we come down and inviting us to come on in.
Come on in.
On a moonlight swim.
On a moonlight swim.
Though the air is cold with kisses oh so sweet.
And that's pretty much it. That's the only real good cover that I heard. So that's my song of the week.
Nice. Good pick. I like it.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's our episode for the week. Let us know what you thought. And how can they do that, Justin?
Shoot us an email at tcbcast@gmail.com or a message on Facebook or Twitter.
Cool. And make sure if you guys want to subscribe to Patreon, and how can they do that?
Join us at patreon.com/tcbcast, and you'll have early access to episodes, exclusive content, episodes of TCBcast Now, special film commentaries, which did we want to announce the film commentary, at least one of them that for sure we decided we're doing next month.
Sure.
We're doing Elvis and the Beauty Queen.
That'll be interesting.
Which I have, but I actually have never seen all the way through.
I think I've seen it once, and that was it. From what I remember, I wasn't too impressed, but we'll see.
So that's coming up in March, and just a ton of other additional content, and of course the big thing being our my new Blue Suede review of Wild in the Country this month, and then Blue Hawaii obviously next month. I'm doing those in chronological order. So
yes, and then we also have The Girl Can't Help It.
Yes, which will be coming out this week on our Patreon.
Cool. All right. Well, it's a hot time in Florida.
It's a rainy night in Georgia.
On a moonlight swim. On a moonlight swim. On a moonlight swim.
You've been listening to the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast. Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar have left the building.
Someone must have stomped on his head with those blue suede shoes.
Thank you and good night.